At the state capitol and the Maddy Institute, it's the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Kepler.
Welcome. The money spent in the upcoming elections this year is sure to be mind-boggling. Our guest is the California Fair Political Practices Commission Chair, Jody Remke, who's the cop on the beat responsible for kind of following campaign finance, conflicts of interest, lobbying, things of that nature. So welcome to the Maddy Report.
Thank you.
So can you briefly describe what the FPPC does?
Sure. We are the state agency responsible for regulating money in politics and helping to fight political corruption. Our jurisdiction covers three main areas. That's campaign finance laws, lobbying regulations, and financial conflicts of interest for public officials.
You are one busy person.
It's a lot to cover.
Well, you know, there's an argument about donations. Maybe they should be kept secret because, you know, there's this free speech. We don't want people to come attack us, retaliate against us because we take a position on issues. But then the flip side of that is, you know, the need for transparency. How do you balance that?
I think that's exactly it. It is a balancing act. Obviously, free speech is a fundamental right that must be protected, but we also know the enormous benefit from disclosure. Disclosure deters corruption. Disclosure cues the voter. Disclosure helps us detect the violations. So by disclosing these large contributions and expenditures, we can shine a light on who's influencing a public official. Voters can have cues as to an alliance between a candidate and a donor or special interest behind a ballot measure. Like I said, finally, it really helps us track the flow of money and see violations.
There's a movie clip, Follow the Money.
Yes,
so,
there it is.
Probably true. There's also this issue of transparency, donor transparency, with this last-minute flood of money. You see it a lot in campaigns where, you know, the money donated and spent is at the last minute. Well, if that's true, how do you regulate that? I mean, it's by the time you can get the word out as to who's behind it, the election's already over.
Sure. I would say there are two fronts to that. First, there's strong laws and tough enforcement. California has some of the strictest campaign finance rules in the country. For example, the 90-day period before an election, every contribution and expenditure of $1,000 or more must be reported within 24 hours. So that's a quick way to turn around that information. Now, if someone tries to violate that type of disclosure, we have strong enforcement tools. Right now, we have the authority to do pre-election audits and investigations and seek to compel disclosure before the election, obviously when it matters most. After the election, if we find out about violations, we prosecute and we impose fines. The worse of the violation, the tougher the fine.
You know, I want to ask you, the FPPC staff recently expressed some concerns about a proposed bill, AB 700, that would require disclosure of groups that fund campaign advertisements. What are your concerns?
Let me start by saying the Commission's concerns are not related to the public policy behind the bill. Okay. We fully support transparency in all political ads. Our concerns, and the whole bipartisan commission voted to oppose unless amended, go to really the confusing and sometimes inconsistent provisions in the bill with existing law. It would make it hard for us to provide advice and enforce.
Is this something that could be handled through a regulation by the FPPC as opposed to a law by the legislature?
Some of it can and has been. We have plenty of regulations on what kind of disclosure is necessary. Some of it would require legislation, but what we did is we proposed amendments to the author's office to make it more workable and understandable, and I think, quite honestly, a stronger bill for disclosure. So hopefully...
Are they listening?
We hope they're listening. We're waiting for a response back.
Okay. What about new forms of political communication, you know, social media? So someone blogs something, you think it's just a regular citizen blogging in support of a candidate, but really they're being paid by the candidate. How do you ferret that out?
Well, first, I would stress that I think the new tools that are being used should really be encouraged. It's an opportunity to engage the public, particularly the younger voters. But as far as regulation goes, the Commission has already adopted regulations to put, as far as mobile devices and the Internet, the same type of disclosures are required that are currently required on television and print ads.
Okay. Well, up next, we're going to talk about lobbyists. They are a necessary part of the political process, but when does effective advocacy go too far? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. We're talking with California Fair Political Practices Commission Chair Jody Remke. This year you issued a new rule on something called a ride-along. There's a loophole apparently in the law when it comes to lobbyists with that issue. What is a ride-along, and what is its intended purpose?
Sure. The ride-along exception was intended to allow persons with subject matter expertise on one of the topics at issue to communicate with lawmakers without triggering or having to register as a lobbyist if they went along with their employer's lobbyist.
Okay, so in other words, talking about education, so a lobbyist brings a teacher along.
Exactly.
That's what it's intended to do.
Exactly.
But apparently there was an investigation around former Lieutenant Governor Cruz Bustamante around this issue. What exactly happened there?
Well, Mr. Bustamante was hired to communicate with public officials. He was not registered as a lobbyist, but what he did was had a lobbyist ride along with him. Basically, he flipped the exception.
Okay. But you've now created a new rule to kind of address that concern.
Well, we amended the existing regulation to clarify the purpose and focus behind it being to allow experts to communicate with lawmakers. We want lawmakers to have the best information possible, but it has to be an employee, and they have to be going along with their employer's lobbyist.
Yeah, but on the subject matter, it's a little vague. Should we just scrap the whole law and forget it?
Subject matter expert? Mm-hmm. I think it's a pretty common sense approach. That's what we
So
were going for.
A reasonable person approach to
exactly.
That
What
term.
would a reasonable person conclude? Okay. A teacher, a scientist, they're experts. Mm-hmm. A well-known former politician whose only skill is getting in the door is not an expert.
Depends on what the subject is, I suppose. Well, there's another attempt to regulate lobbyists that the PPC has opposed. That's AB 1200. What would AB 1200 do, and why do you think it's a good idea?
Well, as I understand it, AB 1200 is what it would require are people who are participating in the state contracting process on behalf of their employer, vendors and contractors and the like, to register as lobbyists. Now, again, the bipartisan commission opposes the bill in its current form. What we do is we take a pragmatic approach to all bills. Is there a clearly identified problem? Will the solution address the problem? Can we implement the law? And quite honestly, this bill fails on all fronts. We have not heard a problem in the procurement process that's been identified. We do not believe that this would provide any greater disclosure, and we have real concerns about us being able to implement it.
I think people think about the $11 billion that California spends each year on contracts and think, oh, we've got to do something.
Well, that's why we have a public contracts code.
Right, right. And I think you were saying also the Department of General Services and other state agencies would possibly be better suited.
Well, they already oversee it, and it's a very complex system. And my concern is if there's a problem with that system, let's try to address it. Let's not put another regulation on top of it.
Okay, now one last thing I want to talk to you about was something called the Rewrite Project that you've got going on. Tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. One of the things the Commission is focusing on right now is streamlining and simplifying the law wherever possible. We want to improve compliance and, more importantly, promote access to everyone into the system. It's a confusing area of law. So one thing we're doing is we're working with Davis and Berkeley law schools to take a comprehensive look at the Act, rewrite it in plain English. Everyone can understand it.
Law in plain English?
That's
Is
the
that
goal.
Even possible?
I believe so.
That's the goal.
It's the goal, and I think we're going to get there.
But that law has been around for some time, right?
40 years. And that's part of the issue. Over 40 years, lots of amendments, inconsistencies, difficult to follow. We just want to make it like you're reading a book, and anyone can pick it up and say, yeah, I can run for office. I get it.
So that law, then, you're saying when they add amendments, they're not looking at the previous amendments, kind of like barnacles on a ship, they just keep adding amendments? Is that typically what happens?
I didn't say that, Mark.
Okay.
But sometimes I believe unintended consequences occur.
Right. It's sometimes difficult, to read these laws. I'm a lawyer, and you have a difficult time reading.
Exactly.
I can imagine a normal citizen. That's very difficult. And you're going to clarify that.
That's our goal.
Okay. Well, I want to thank Chairperson Remke for that discussion. Up next, the politics of campaign finance reform. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report.